Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to APA's Plan4Health webinar, Introduction to Wayfinding. I'm so excited to present to you my new friend and colleague, Katie Osborn, Principal and Wayfinding Strategist of Via Collaborative, to discuss her work and wayfinding as a concept and as a practice as part of planning, and of course as a way to promote public health in our communities. Katie Osborn is, as I mentioned, Principal and Wayfinding Strategist of Via Collective and has 20 years of experience in wayfinding, branding, and environmental graphic design. Her firm focuses on wayfinding strategy and information management of large institutions, including public spaces, educational facilities, and transportation hubs. And of course, all of this relates very much to planning. Katie lives in Brooklyn, New York, and she's a member of the American Institute of Graphic Arts, the Society of Environmental Graphic Designers, and the American Planning Association. She's a former board member of the Gowanus Canal Conservancy and is currently the Director of Communications for AIA New York Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And I also want to mention I myself am Anna Ricklin, and I manage APA's Planning and Community Health Center, through which is sponsoring this webinar this afternoon. So Katie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to join me, and I'm very excited to share with you our practice of wayfinding and what we do at Via Collective. So we are on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, so feel free to share whatever you would like today, and at the end we will have a question and answer. So starting out, Via Collective, today what we're going to talk about is how wayfinding is more than just signs, what a wayfinding system actually is and how to design it, as well as integrating a fully integrated wayfinding system, and then I'm going to talk about two case studies that are about connecting people to parks. So Via Collective was founded in 2009 under the name the Office of Katie Osborn. That's me. But as the company grew and the focus of the work became very clear, the name changed to better reflect our mission, which is to be designers of wayfinding systems for a seamless journey through the built environment. And we do this through the contributions and dedication of a collective of people that are involved in that process. And I'm going to talk more about who those people are and how we work with them. So this is the collective. This is myself and our creative directors and our office managers and our designers. And although we're very passionate about wayfinding, we are not so good at shuffleboard. In our inaugural season at the Royal Palm Shuffleboard Club, we came in 6 of 6, but we had a great time doing it. We are a WBE certified firm in New York City and New York State, and with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We are also a DBE with New York, Pennsylvania, and California. The services we focus on is strictly wayfinding. So we develop research plans, we develop master plans, we develop wayfinding and information programs, environmental graphics, signage guidelines, or digital wayfinding tools. We work across multiple sectors, including education, hospital, public spaces, transportation, and of course, corporate headquarters. And our clients range anything from architects and developers to nonprofits, hospitals, educational facilities, and even a summer camp. So very often you will hear the term wayfinding and signage as if they're mutually exclusive. But if you're able to take away one idea today, it is that wayfinding does not equal signage. Wayfinding is actually the strategy of navigating people through the physical space. But signage is one of the many wayfinding tools that help people navigate that physical space. So what exactly makes up a wayfinding system? Ultimately, it comes down to architecture, branding, and the user or the visitor. The architecture is one of the first things that people recognize about a space. They see a gateway, they see a front door, they see a beacon that is going to get them, they know they've reached their destination. And then using various pathways, finding an escalator or an elevator, ways to assist them to get through the actual physical interior spaces. The floors and the wall finishes, lighting, technology integrations can also assist in navigation. And ultimately, it's the architectural spaces, things like ceiling heights or intersections, that allow us to consider where information should be placed and how it should look in order for people to interact with it along their journey. And branding plays a major role in this. The brand is also extended through the wayfinding system. That incorporates the typography, the color, other branding attributes that clearly mark that you're in the right place. It increases or decreases the usage of a specific area of a space, either by drawing attention to it or even removing the brand from it completely so that people don't recognize it. And you can keep people away from areas that way as well. So, but well-integrated branding helps the visitor confirm that they're in the right location and that there's brand consistency throughout the entire space. And in some cases, branding through placemaking is a wonderful way to have a playfulness around the brand to allow people to interact with the space and the place in a new and interesting fashion and beyond wayfinding. And of course, there's the visitor. The visitor is ultimately our main client here. They're the ones that are using these tools throughout their entire wayfinding process. And the process begins way before they see a sign. Websites, smartphones, mail, email, these are typically the first things that people interact with in order to get to their destination. And digital tools are, or like even a customer service line, that helps people plan out their journey to understand where they're going. And then, of course, it's the architecture and the branding that will be the first things that greet them as they approach their destinations. So maps are also obviously a very important part of this entire process, and heads-up mapping is an integral part of excuse me, it's a very controversial part of the wayfinding system, but it's so common now because of the familiarity with GPS. But it definitely should be tested in order to be confirmed. Such as with New York University, the campus in Manhattan, we did a heads-up mapping test, and we found that people were so familiar with Manhattan and its cardinal directions, we did not need to have a heads-up map, whereas the maps that we designed for Brooklyn did need to be heads-up mapping because the landmarks and the familiarity with cardinal directions is not strong. So within a wayfinding system and the process of designing that, there are a series of tools that need to be utilized throughout the entire process because the path of travel begins way before people actually start to redefine. The path of travel actually begins by somebody discovering something is there. They prepare for their travel to it. They access the location. They navigate around it. They locate their destination, and then they depart. So using Governor's Island in New York as an example, like we've had many hot summer days recently, you want to find something fun and interesting and new to do. So you look on Time Out New York and you see this Jazz Age lawn party going on. So you just figure out the way to get to Governor's Island is free, but you probably have to take a a subway or a bike or a car to get there to begin with. So once you then arrive at the ferry landing, there's information there to tell you that you finally arrived. So you take the ferry across and you navigate around the island using things like maps and directories, directional signage, and digital apps. There could be interactive signage or architectural cues that also help you. And then finally, arriving at your destination. In this case, it was probably the music that led you to the final destination of the Jazz Age lawn party. So very often it's the front door or the large architectural features that you're looking for. And then finally, you need to depart. So you need to figure out how to get back out, in this case, to the ferry landing, what time does the ferry leave, and if you're heading to Manhattan or Brooklyn. So the full system of an integrated wayfinding system actually integrates these two ideas of architecture and people and branding, as well as the tools that you're going to use in this process. And tools need to meet people where they are. So we look at the idea of wayfinding being able to reach people from one to many people at a time, or just one-on-one at a time. And architecture, signs, and printed materials can all be something that reach many people all at once, whereas a digital component, even if it's interactive on site, typically there's only one person that can actually use the interactivity at a time, or they have a digital smartphone in their pocket that they use. And of course, customer service programs are an excellent way to help people find their final destination. And all of these things need to be branded in some way. Although I've only marked the sign, print, and the digital, people within a hospital would have such thing as a vest, or when you are going through a park and you see a national park ranger, you think of these people as being part of the brand as well, and part of that wayfinding experience. So ultimately, there are only two types of visitors. You have a first-time visitor, or you have a returning visitor. Your first-time visitors are people like tourists, or there's a delivery guy or a vendor coming for an event, maybe college freshmen, right? But your returning visitors are your local residents, your students, your employees. But then we look at the experience of the day-to-day, and it can either be a high-stress experience, such as hospitals or transportation hubs, or even a complex urban space, or a low-stress visit, such as a city park. It can be very relaxing, lots to do and see, sporting events. Even though there's a lot to navigate around, just the environment is lower stress. It's more about the fun. And of course, hotels. Hotels are all about customer service and all about concierge. And if you're lost, you're definitely going to ask someone where to go. So if we look at this in terms of creating a system across high frequency of visits versus low frequency of visits, and where the high stress and the low stress visit meets, we look at things like high frequency of visitors, such as the business tenants that are there every day, or returning college students. They're there all the time. It's very low stress. Whereas we have low stress visitors and low frequency visitors, such as hotels, sporting events, and parks. On the other side of that, the high stress and the low frequency of visitors are the hospitals, the transportation hubs, and the complex urban spaces. And this is where the wayfinding system is most important, is in this high stress, high frequency of visit areas. These other areas rely on tools that help people move through the physical space, but it's in these high stress, high frequency areas that things like digital apps and the multiple tools such as customer service programs that people don't necessarily think of as wayfinding can be extra important. I also want to talk a little bit about the integrated wayfinding systems integrating universal design into wayfinding systems. All of these, designing for universal design allows us to design for everyone, essentially. And a lot of people think of universal design as only designing for a particular disability. But in this case, you're looking at it in terms of what kind of tools and processes can we integrate into a wayfinding system, such as the top three, the first three are really about the multiple tools that you can use for a wayfinding system that will allow people to use what they need when they need it. So whether that be a digital tool to plan their way to the destination, or within the physical space, use a handheld map because that's what they're most familiar with, or having extra customer service teams in place in high-density, high-stress areas. And for instance, number 7, the space for approach and use, that's really about the location of signage and the integrating the signage into the actual architecture. So really paying attention to how we work with universal design principles in order to make wayfinding effective for everyone, and not thinking of it as just about people with disabilities, but really universally approachable. And universal design ultimately makes for good design for everyone. So just a quick recap on those ideas that I just talked about is that ultimately wayfinding is more than signs. Wayfinding is really the strategy, and signage are the tools. Wayfinding systems encompass the architecture, the branding, and the visitor. Designing a system provides the tools to the entire user journey, and that path of travel includes the discovery, preparation, the access, navigation, the locating their destination, and then departing the system. And finally, integrated wayfinding systems occur along the whole path of travel. They provide tools that are available as appropriate to the visitor, and utilizing the universal design principles for greatest access to all is a best practice case. So next I'm going to talk about a couple case studies, two in fact. The Randalls Park Alliance to develop a wayfinding system for their park. Then I was approached by another organization, the New York Restoration Project, to work on a project in the South Bronx. And these two parks are connected, and these two areas are connected through an architectural feature that we will discuss here in a moment. So Randalls Island, as many may know, is a 500-acre park that sits right up in the north of the East River, just south of the Bronx, on the east side of Manhattan and next to Astoria, Queens. It has the Tri-Road Bridge goes over this, and so does the Hellgate Bridge, which the Amtrak train goes over. It's primarily public space, huge fields, parkland, but it also has 13 government agencies on it. And so there's a lot of flat land, and there's a lack of visual landmarks in order for people to really understand where they are within the physical space. So despite the fact that there's only one ring road on Randalls Island, people were getting lost all the time. So one of the first things we did was the audit. In order to truly understand how the wayfinding was and was not working, we wanted to see what they had in place at that point. What we realized is they had about 20 years of signage that had been placed on top of each other as new things came online, or as traffic routes changed, or as visitor needs need to be met. And what happened was you ended up with a hodgepodge of information that was inconsistent in language, inconsistent in placement, inconsistent in size, and became very confusing to look at. So then we went and looked at each of the existing sign types and who the owners of those sign types were. So as you can see, we have almost 20 sign types here. That means 20 different owners of signs, and what they said and what they looked like, and all of this just added to the confusion. We also looked at what things were called. So this is part of the naming process. If you begin your wayfinding journey at home and you look on the website to figure out how to get to a particular field, and the field is named the Fresh Meadows Field, but then you get to the actual park and you see signs for fields 50 to 54, those two things don't connect. So this audit allowed us to understand what language is being used across all components of communication in order to streamline that and create a consistent nomenclature across all tools. We also then went out and surveyed all the park users. We asked them questions about how often they visited the park, where they went, why did they use the park, if they used public transportation, or if they took the bridges across from the boroughs. We basically just wanted to understand how they accessed it, what they utilized the park for, and how often they came back. One system we like to use in testing and understanding how people understand physical space is mental mapping. This is really fun because you get to understand how people perceive themselves within the physical space. And this is an incredibly helpful exercise in designing new maps. So we asked them 5 questions, essentially, where were they standing, where was a major destination, where was a borough, and a few others. And from there we could really understand if they if they had a sense of how big the island was, where they were within the entire space of it, and if they felt comfortable and knowledgeable about accessing the island in a full way. What we found was that the majority of people did not truly understand the breadth of the island, that it only took 25 minutes to walk across the entire island, that all restrooms were in about a 10-minute walk. They couldn't place themselves in relationship to Astoria, Queens, or to Manhattan. They didn't necessarily know where they were parked, and so getting back to their parking space was also a difficulty. So all of these things were really helpful for us in order to be able to design a new map, which was the basis for our wayfinding system. So we focused on the idea of iconography in that the island is used primarily for sports and events. We created a series of icons that focus on sports like soccer and horse riding and tennis and softball and those kinds of things. And we color-coded them according to the type of use they were. So transportation was blue, and sports were orange, and restrooms were red, and information was red, and those kinds of things. So that at a very quick glance, you could quickly understand which group of information referred to what. You'll also notice the circles on here. Those are distances walked, but they're in minutes instead of miles, simply because most people don't understand how far it is within a particular distance measurement, but they can say, oh, in 5 minutes, I can go get something to drink and I'll be back for the next inning of my son's baseball game. So we've found through research, or spending a little bit more time with this new map on the island and going out and talking to visitors this summer about how they're getting around and if they are utilizing the park more often and have a better sense of familiarity with the park, and the usage of the park spaces is actually going up. And part of that is attributed to the ability for people to have a greater understanding of the full park. So these maps and the corresponding directional information was placed in different areas around the park, primarily key decision points. Icon Stadium is their major running track and field area. We had the banners that focused on detailing the destination of the location, so either Icon Stadium or Fields 80 to 85, and the icons always referred to what actually happened there. So it was very clear, very cut and dry. You'll also notice that all the banners are blue with these green icons. Because New York City Parks is a strong partner with Randalls Island, but Randalls Island Park Alliance actually manages the park, we wanted to really communicate the branding colors of Randalls Island Park, which came out in the banners. So we also provided information as to which borough you were heading towards, whether that be Manhattan, if you could bike or walk across the bridge, and again, more field signs. And then at various access points, such as the Bronx, the Triborough Bridge going over to the Bronx, you would have a banner for the Bronx as well as a map. So if you were coming on or leaving the island, you would know exactly where you were in that location. And then this is the Queens location. As you can imagine, these large stanchions of bridges all begin to look the same. And without a particular definition of which borough this is heading towards, it can be very confusing. So next is actually a film that talks about the connector that was built to connect Randalls Island to the South Bronx. We recommend you put your computer speakers on for this, as we have been told that it's better to hear through your computer. So here we go.
We're at the Low Bridge, the low corollary to the high bridge, the second pedestrian-only access bridge in the Bronx, and it is about to open. And people are going to be able to get over to Randalls Island. There's going to be no more tri-bridge, no more stairs with the bikes and carrying the bike up the stairs. It's going to be amazing.
Residents of the South Bronx will finally get pedestrian and bicycle access to the South Bronx Greenway and more than 330 acres of open space and amenities on Randalls Island. The connector provides the only hassle-free at-grade access between Randalls Island and the South Bronx.
The beauty of Randalls Island Connector rests in the fact that it's opening up a whole new opportunity for Bronx residents who have never, and I mean never, stepped foot on the island that is so close to their homes, right here next to this fine river.
Yes, it's actually my daily commute to work. So I'm going to get to, have a smoother ride and actually a more efficient ride. The bridge over here is really, it's not conducive to bicycle riding. This seems to be, the perfect solution.
But I've lived in the Bronx right over here for 6 years. And we've been waiting and waiting. We're so happy.
It's beautiful and makes everything much more convenient and safe to get between the Bronx and Manhattan. Going to Randalls Island and to Manhattan should be interesting. A little smoother, it's a lot easier than going all the way up to the Triborough. And it's a good innovation, to keep the Bronx connected.
I think it's great. I think it's all about how do you get to your parks, sustainability, carbon footprint. Use your bike and not pay money to the MTA.
It's great for families to connect, to be involved in sports. To me, this is a game changer for this community to have easy access to over 300 acres of fun.
It's a happy day. Really nice. I'm sure it's going to be heavily used.
This is wonderful, and we need more pedestrian-only bridges in New York. So I can't wait to start using this. I think I'll go to Randalls Island much more.
Okay, and I think we are back now. Okay, so yes, that street film is available from the file download, as well as this whole presentation will be available as well from the files section. So, talking now about the Haven project. Again, as I mentioned, this was a project that was is being developed by the New York Restoration Project, and it's actually about connecting the neighborhood to Randalls Island. The South Bronx is basically cut off by the Bruckner Expressway, and it is primarily an industrial area. And so the actual neighborhood has a lot of street traffic to cross in order to actually get to Randalls Island. It's less than a half-mile away to 500 acres of park, but the route itself is not very attractive. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't have great lighting. So our goal here is to deploy a system that integrates into the neighborhood in a way that's about lighting or billboards or street graphics or even building ramps. So this project is still in the works, and we are working with them to develop a system to best integrate into the neighborhood. But I'll walk you through our planning process on this. So our approach was slightly different because if wayfinding provides direction to multiple destinations, queues at one-to-one level, or have queues at one-to-one level and define routes, this was really more about a neighborhood and a community. So within a neighborhood, we consider things like scale and architectural requirements and sightline constraints. And for the community, it's really about the past, the present, and the future, and what the community has, how it exists now, and where they're taking it. And so with all of that, we came up with more of a placemaking type approach to this system, which really is about connecting the spaces at the larger scale and engages the user for the direction and the learning and overall experience. So we worked with the planners to define bike routes, and there's a shuttle bus that's going to take people throughout the neighborhood and down into the connector to Randalls Island. And then this is the primary pedestrian routes as well. And so when we overlaid all of those, we had an understanding of what the primary route, quote unquote, could be for this initial phase of work. So what we started to do was mask out buildings that we could utilize. Working with New York Restoration Project, they approached different landlords to see if they would be interested in participating in large-scale graphics or putting information on their buildings and wayfinding on their buildings in order to help people get through this neighborhood. So in the lower left, you can see the yellow line, and at the very top of the box is a little black arrow. So that will show you this path of travel that we're going down. So we're basically coming out underneath the Bruckner Expressway, and we would take a right down Willow, and these are potential buildings. The building at the far end is actually the end we would take a left on to go to Randalls Island. So it was a great sight line for us to be able to utilize that building as well. But these are buildings along the way. And so again, like as we approached, we have this two-story building and then the building straight in front of us. And then we take a left when we hit the building and hit the railroad overpass at the Hellgate Bridge. And going underneath the bridge takes you to the connector at Randalls Island. So what we wanted to do here was really look at how to connect this idea of play and the Bronx, and we had these icons that we used on Randalls Island, and we looked at incorporating those. Then we also considered a more of a realistic photographic approach to this concept as well, because it wasn't about doing an exact replica of the Randalls Island program, but about connecting this neighborhood to graphics that they could connect to as well. So in this case, we looked at typography and color and arrows and imagery, and we looked at the different sign types that we'd be able to create out of these things. So we could do street banners, we could do building wraps, we could do fence wrapping, we could do vinyl on window fronts, we could do street sidewalk graphics, really playing up really non-traditional. And as you can see, there's actually no typical quote-unquote sign that would have an arrow with a list of destinations on this. This was really more about a larger brushstroke of an idea and about the bigger idea of the neighborhood. So what we came up with was actually these really large-scale graphics. As you can see, could be placed across an entire building, and incredibly bold and graphic in this neighborhood that is primarily about industry, right? So in and of it, this would allow people to engage with the street in a totally different way. And as you can see, on the left-hand side of this image, you'll see the little magenta blocks on the buildings. And so you can get a sense of what this sight line is like to take people back up into the neighborhood across the Bruckner Expressway. But then we looked at, what if it wasn't so magenta? Because magenta, even though that's one of my favorite colors, is not necessarily so appropriate in a neighborhood that's about industry and primarily red brick. So we looked at what would happen if it was more about integrating into a bold graphic onto a black painted building. And then, oops, sorry, I wanted to point out, on the right-hand side, you see underneath the Hellgate Amtrak pathway, it says Randalls Island with the arrows. So as you reach underneath the pathway, you would then be greeted by this sign, "Welcome to the Bronx." And to the left of Bronx, you see the map of essentially of what that neighborhood pathway is all about. So this is the way we connected these two neighborhoods in order to create a graphic approach that was appropriate for the different areas, but connected the people in a continuous fashion. So a couple of resources before we move into the Q&A. A couple of things. My personal, and I'm sure that many of you know, The Image of the City by Kevin Lynch. It is a very old book that in which wayfinding was first introduced as a concept. Wayfinder is a technology. It's an open source technology being utilized in London for sight impaired persons for wayfinding, utilizing their personal smartphone. The Center of Excellence in Universal Design is where the design principles were taken from, and a great resource for more information about universal design approaches. The Society of Experiential Graphic Design is the professional organization for wayfinding and environmental graphics. The Signage Foundation is a phenomenal organization that really focuses on developing wayfinding and environmental graphic design programs. They even offer grants up to $30,000 for research around how wayfinding and environmental graphic design can help improve public spaces. The American Planning Association, obviously, as many of you know, and us, Via Collective, and we can be reached at hello@Via Collective. I also wanted to mention a great program that the APA is working with the Healthy Communities Coalition at the Greater Helena area of Lewis and Clark County, Montana, and you may want to check out that website as what they're doing with wayfinding in regards to this project. So that is it.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really excellent, and I know that some of the comments that are coming in are not just questions, but also just kudos to you for this work, and it's been really interesting to hear about it. So even a comment from Kenny just now about fantastic work.
Oh,
so,
thank you, Kenny.
If you haven't seen the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, or you want to add a question or a comment, please add it now. We've had some really interesting questions come in. Maybe looking at one of the more recent questions, asking about the project you just described in the Bronx, if it was part of a larger neighborhood revitalization that also included landscape and lighting and other rebranding initiatives of the city. Was your effort folded into a larger initiative? And then
it was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go on. Oh. Yes. So the whole project is called the Haven Project, and New York Restoration Project is working with developers and architects and landscape architects to revitalize the area around it. And there are waterfront areas, and there are just areas for walking around the neighborhood, and it's primarily industrial, but there is so much waterfront and access to this park, and there's this neighborhood that is so close that their initiative is really about being able to give people more public access to public space. So yeah, the Haven Project is the full project by the New York Restoration Project, and it's just a wonderful project that they've been developing for the last 2 years and are continuing to work on.
And kind of going along with that was a follow-up question about how you incorporate wayfinding or other placemaking initiatives into an area where you may not have that other bigger initiative of rebranding and landscaping, and if there are funding times.
Trying to think. Actually, so for instance, with New York University in Brooklyn, New York University is part of an area called Metrotech, which is a large business district, and they needed to be able to blend into the business district, but also create a sense of where their branding was. And so we worked with NYU by integrating and creating exterior signage guidelines that allowed them to have a presence. So they created a sense of place just through their own branding that already existed, but allowed them to integrate into the fabric of the neighborhood that was already there. So in that case, it wasn't necessarily a major rebranding initiative or a major redevelopment initiative, but it was about acknowledging where NYU buildings were versus other non-NYU buildings, or other corporate offices and things like that. And so there are cases where placemaking is utilized in such a way that allows people to, it just attracts people to a certain area. Again, that idea of like using branding to attract people to a certain area versus another location, and allowing them to engage in that space as a destination.
Thanks. Switching gears a little bit to a specific question about the Randalls Island project, but also could certainly apply to a lot of other work, and the question is about the MUTCD code, the Manual on Unified Transportation Control Devices, Traffic Control Devices. Is that a consideration in the Randalls Island project? And you would think it was a common consideration or rule that you might have to work with.
Yes, so we work very closely with the DOT or the other agencies. And Randalls Island, for Randalls Island, it was New York City, DOT, and the Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, and those were the New York City Parks Department. Those are the three other major stakeholders that we worked with. I also noticed a question here about how did we get 13 stakeholders to work together. So we had the primary stakeholders of those groups, and then the additional stakeholders, they were more of a, this is happening, they were on board with it, and they were given sort of more FYIs, and we, got that. We had to make sure we understood their concerns and incorporate those. But in terms of the DOTs and the actual road signs, what we did was we worked with them to develop a messaging system that would allow people to clearly understand which destination was either left or right of the ring road, but then, it basically was that all other destinations straight ahead kind of idea. It was just very simple, very clean. However, the DOT was unable to produce those signs, and so we're still working with Randalls Island and trying to move that forward. I think that is one of the difficulties of complex projects, is you do have multiple stakeholders, and sometimes people are on different timelines, right? So Randalls Island Park had a timeline. This project took about 1.5 years in total. That ended about 1.5 years ago. We're still working with them on the DOT project to try and get that moving forward. We were able to get the DOT biking signs in place right around the same time as the wayfinding signage went in, which was fantastic because that really connected people, again, access across the bridges and more people using bikes. And with the connector opening, it was just really a great way for people to know exactly how to get to Randalls Island. So hopefully that answered the question about DOT and traffic signage. And we also too, we don't have a specialty in traffic DOT signage per se. We would always work with a traffic planner and review plans with them and things like that, specifically for any kind of DOT work.
Great. And kind of related to that in terms of stakeholder engagement, there's a couple of questions about how you work with community. So you mentioned how you went and talked to park users and found out how they're using the park and how they access the park. But is there a particular method to engaging community in your making projects? And then related to that specifically on if you're going to put signs on privately owned buildings, have community partners weighed in or had a chance to review the signage?
Yeah, so community engagement is super important in these kinds of projects, obviously. There was a lot of meetings, a lot of presentations. We work directly with community boards. New York City also has what's called the Public Design Commission, and so anything that's up in the public space that's on public land needs to be approved through them. The Randalls Island Park program was all done through the PDC. For things like the surveys and the mind mapping and that kind of stuff on the island, I have a team, like a street team, that goes out, and we have we have a clipboard and we have hard copies of paper, or sometimes we have an iPad component that we can take surveys on as well. But we basically we just walk up to people and ask them, hey, do you have 2 minutes for a survey? We're doing some work on the island and we'd love to get your opinion, kind of thing. So it's really, it could just be who's ever willing to talk to us. But then there's also just the system that's already in place within the city of working within the community boards, presenting to them. There's going out and understanding who is a private owner within the community, but very engaged in the community, or a nonprofit in the community that owns property, and they'd be very interested in engaging the community as well. And New York Restoration Project did a lot of that groundwork in terms of getting building owners on board and understanding and explaining to them the benefit of the program, of the Haven Project, of how it will engage more people and bring more people to the area, but people within the neighborhood. This was really about engaging the neighborhood to explore more and to see more of the park more and around the shoreline and things like that. So the community engagement part is incredibly important, and there's getting the community engaged earlier in the process is always better for the project in the end. It may take longer in the beginning, but I think most planners will agree that part is critical to the long-term success of the program.
Certainly. Thank you. And then regarding another aspect of long-term success, there's a really relevant question about maintenance and how do municipalities handle maintenance for wayfinding measures? Is there a plan for that from the beginning, or does that do you always have to bring that up to them about the ongoing maintenance, and are you involved in maintenance at all?
We always ask, because sometimes people think about it in advance, and other times they don't. In certain cases, we've actually built into the program of hiring a wayfinding manager for the program after we've done our work, so that someone is there to manage content, to manage any new wayfinding expansion, whether that be building a new area within the mobile app or placing new signs as new construction comes online. So, or even replacing signs. Even on Randalls Island, there was a damage to one of the signs, and it needed to be replaced. So there is maintenance long-term, and that's always something that we talk about with our clients at the very beginning of a project, because even if you can't just put in a sign and think you're done. It's an ongoing, living, breathing program, just like the neighborhood or the park or wherever it may be that it's in.
great. And someone mentioned that it was a great idea to pair the DOT bike signage with new wayfinding signs and as a way to streamline the look and feel of an area. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I invite folks who are, if they're wondering if they should write something, definitely to chat another question. Someone did ask from a professional perspective kind of how you got into wayfinding and how you took your direction from graphic design into wayfinding, and maybe where you see this going next, and maybe a little bit more about how you see the importance of wayfinding as part of the built environment.
Sure. So my degree is in graphic design. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I would say that I've always been attracted to, graphics and visual, those kinds of things. But I think it was really my experience of traveling and studying in Europe in college and using their public transportation systems that really hooked me. And I was always just intrigued by this process of navigating through public spaces. And so I slowly kind of found my way, literally, to wayfinding. I moved to New York in the spring of 2001, and I had one interview with one firm, and that firm had the contract for the air train at JFK, which was my very first project in New York City. And that basically launched my career into wayfinding itself, and I just totally fell in love with it. So I think it's something that was just inherent in me, and understanding physical space has always been a really just interesting, something that I've always been very interested in architecture, but also why people use certain spaces and why you see some plazas are really empty and some plazas are really full, right? Like what attracts people to a physical space and what keeps them engaged in a space has always been something that's just really interesting to me. So yeah, it was in 2001 that I really took the deep dive into wayfinding, and then worked at various firms, and then it was in 2009 that I decided to start the office of Katie Osborn. But being able to work on really large-scale city projects is just so exciting to me. Like some people they took completely shy away at the idea of like you have 10 stakeholders and you have all these government agencies, and like that just puts a huge smile on my face. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such an incredible challenge, like such an awesome opportunity to be able to build something that will engage people, to allow them to enjoy and participate and be a part of their city or their school or their hospital or whatever it is, or just knowing where to pick up a bus, right? So a transportation project we're working on in Pittsburgh is about really making sure that people know where they can find a bus and what time the bus picks up, and how often it comes. And without that basic knowledge of just the understanding and the function of a system, people can't engage in their cities. And I just see wayfinding as a way for people to truly engage in and participate in their cities and where they live. And I just love it. It's just super exciting to me.
And as you think about the connection to public health, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about the connection between wayfinding and public health, and you were talking about place and the use of public space and how health can be promoted through wayfinding.
Absolutely. One of the core mission pieces of the Haven Project is actually the fact that the South Bronx has some of the highest asthma rates in all of New York City. And this idea of there is 500 acres of park, less than a half mile from this neighborhood, that sits right underneath a huge, like 16-lane highway. There is great asset and great opportunity, for people to be more healthy if they just know where something is and how to get there in a really easy, stressless way, right? So the lower stress the system is, the easier and more frequently people are going to use it. And it also speaks to why we decided to do, instead of rings of distance on the map in Randalls Island, we did it in minutes, because people can have, again, that sense of how far something is. 10 minutes does not seem like a far walk. I can walk to the store in 10 minutes and back. That's not a big deal. Or even I have my afternoon free. You know what? I'm going to walk for 25 minutes. But if they can't see it on a map, if it's not communicated to them in a way that they can easily understand the context of themselves within that physical space, they're not going to engage with it. So I think people inherently want to be able to engage more fully in healthy activity, and by providing them with wayfinding systems that share with them where the closest, bike share dock is, or, that that park is only 10 minutes away, and then it, has all this great stuff in it, and all these kinds of things. The wayfinding system is such an easy way to communicate that on a very permanent level, So it's also, expandable as cities expand, as parks expand, all those kinds of things. It's very flexible. It's a very flexible system to be able to create the wayfinding system, to encourage that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for talking about that. We just have a couple minutes left, but maybe we'll finish the session with a very planner-oriented question, which was how you got permission to paint buildings and then continue to maintain the buildings being painted if it changes hands and ownership.
Right. So we are working on that. The large building that I showed you, that owner, he is in the midst of repainting and refinishing his building. And so that's why we worked on a design for his building specifically. So he's a private owner and has, he has the lease on that area for something like 50 years. It's amazing. So, I think it's really about building the relationship, right? This New York Restoration Project, going to them, seeing it as a location that would be really valuable to the project, and seeing, how engaged he is in the community, and if he understands the value of what that could bring. And he is very interested in it, and it's simply a matter of logistics, really, it comes down to. But the permissions really come from building the relationships and having the conversation, and just keeping that going. So,
as so much of it does. Well, Osborn and Via Collective for your presentation today. For everyone who's still on the line, we will have a recording of this available to all attendees, and of course you can take a moment to download the presentation and the video itself. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a list of files with today's presentation and the video as well. So thank you again, Katie, for taking the time to share your expertise and these examples with us. I think it was really fabulous, and I'm so glad that everyone was able to join us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day.
And thank you so much, Anna, and everyone who joined us today. It was really fun sharing all of this with you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.